Welcome to the Bookshop Aberystwyth Arts Centre's event cast. This is your opportunity to listen again or catch up with our regular Thursday events. This is episode 2, which was recorded on Thursday the 15th of May. We were privileged to welcome Susan Richardson and Ellen Davies to the shop to read from their latest collections, which were published by Cinnamon Press. Ellen Davies, who's the poet you will hear first, is an extraordinary emerging voice. She lives in the Rhondda. She holds a BA in English Literature from Cardiff University and is currently studying for an MA in creative writing at the university. She has previously taken part in the Cinnamon Press mentorship scheme. Susan Richardson is again a Wales-based poet, performer and educator whose two previous collections, Creatures of the Intertidal Zone and Where the Air is Rarefied, themed around her own and others' journeys through the increasingly fragile Arctic environment, which are also published by Cinnamon Press. She is currently poet in residence with the Marine Conservation Society, and she performs at literary and environmental and science festivals throughout the UK for organisations such as WWF and Friends of the Earth. She's also been a regular performer on the BBC Radio 4 and is a resident poet on Saturday Live. The first voice, though, you will hear is Jan Fortune of Cinnamon Press. Cinnamon Press is a small independent publisher run by a family team and based in North Wales. Jan and her team form one of the best publishing outfits in the field, not only in the UK but the world. I recommend that you check out their website at www.cinnamonpress.com. I'd like to thank Jan for helping to organise the event and her contagious enthusiasm. If anyone would like a copy of this recording, please email me. I'm Simon Williams and I'm at bookshop@aber.ac.uk. But let's get the show started. First of all, Jan Fortune.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. We have two extraordinary voices that we're going to hear from this evening. Both have travelled up from Cardiff today, so it's really good to get a bit of South Wales up here. Not quite as far as I live north, but we're getting there. we keep pulling them further and further. Ellen is going to read for us first, so I'll introduce Sue's book a bit later. This is part of a new series that we're doing of pamphlets, and we've had some really exciting little publications as a result. And these books are selling well, they're interesting, and they give two of the authors of this series, interestingly, are young women who are just emerging as, I think, going to be really amazing poets to watch out for. Maria, sadly, was also going to originally come this evening, but she's just finished her PhD in Aber and is currently living in Cambridge, so it was a bit expensive for her to come across, but hopefully we will hear from her later in the year. This collection started out on our mentoring programme, and Ellen and Anne Drysdale fought it out all year. I mean, it was just fantastic, these emails back and forth, and they really put a lot of pressure and a lot of work went into these poems. If any of you are hungry at the moment, you're going to be hungrier. Ellen has a fantastic through line of food, and food is often a metaphor that springs out for issues around community, around identity, around where we belong, around where we find our place. There's also a lot of poems in here that deal with language, and that's reflected in the title, and how we find our identity through language, and particularly in a bilingual context. Please welcome Ellen Davies.
Thank you. I'm just going to stand up. Can people hear me at the back? Because I'm not very loud. Sorry. Thanks to Jan for her introduction, because I don't think I could have said that. So I'm going to start off with a poem called Sewing Lessons, and this was written after my gran told me that I had to sew because I was a woman. Sewing Lessons. Despite your lessons, I never learned to sew. I could never master the fluid movement required to darn a tear, sealing it tight. Could never emulate the steady rhythm of your hand as you thread the faint stitch through the lip of the ripped fabric. Your casual flick of the wrist, the simple knot you tie with a gentle twist, a bow formed from loose ends and dangling cotton wisps. Even now I bring you clothes, garments with gashes of flesh missing, torn out by careless tumbles, blazers with burnished buttons slack from too much wear. I know what you will say. I should learn to sew, to seal up this gasping gulf, but I bless my ignorant hands. As Jan said, I do write a lot about food. I don't know why, maybe it's because I'm perpetually hungry or something, but this next one is called Rhubarb Crumble. Rhubarb, freshly cut on an illicit trip to the garden, still unsteady on your new hip. I watch you peel back the sinewy sheaths with expert fingers, the flat blade balance between index and thumb, revealing the bitter root. The rhubarb must be picked before it goes to waste, you say, carefully peeling the salvage stalks, which have not yet crumbled to seed. I'm going to move away from food just a minute. And when I was younger, I used to borrow the rebus books off my grandfather, and I thought Ian Rankin was like the best author ever. I've grown out of that now, actually, but this is about reading rebus, and it's titled Reading Rebus. I had to buy his new book myself this time, after years of borrowing your second-hand copies. I began aged 12, too young to read rebus, but the crime didn't faze me, nor did his gruff, familiar silence. After a brief retirement, he returned, resurrected by Rankin's pen. As I scan another page, I long for that same power. I think I'm going to read some language poems now, if that's okay. I went to a Welsh language school, but none of my family speak Welsh, so it's quite an odd dynamic. And in the valleys, which is where I'm from, to speak Welsh in school is uncool, even though you go to a Welsh school. So to speak English is transgressive, and I just wanted to kind of explore those feelings around that. If I can find the poem, bear with me. Nope, I'm gonna have to check the index page. Okay, so this is called Cymraeg yw iaith yr ysgol, and it means Welsh is the language of the school. And when you go to a Welsh language school, you're just told that on a daily basis. Strictly a language for school, I left that strange speech at the gates, itching to utter aloud the forbidden words I've been harbouring between my lips all day, words I've been careful not to be caught with, smuggled like sins. We only dared whisper them among ourselves in corridors, empty classrooms, delicious secrets. Cymraeg oedd iaith yr ysgol, and so we traded it in, claiming English for our own, but I search for it now and cannot think of how to say speechless, or how to explain my dumb tongue. I've used Welsh a little bit through the collection, simply because I was exploring rediscovering Welsh on my own terms. So this is a series of three poems with Welsh titles. There is a glossary in the back in case people need to have a look. This first one's called Ein Cws Cyntaf, and it means our first sleep. It began tentative, slow. We slept like soldiers, the crook of your back brushing mine, separate slumber. Seizing our chance, we nestled in my single bunk, under borrowed blankets, hashed together to shelter two, uncomfortable, close. Morning, our crude imprint on clean sheets, the outline of your shape in dawn shadows, faint traces of our shade scent, lingering. Cysgu'n drum, which means sleeping heavily or sleeping tight. Those nights, your touch became common, conclusive, a marriage sealed, an unconscious kiss in the darkness. The solid weight of your warmth, your hand on my hip, now heavy with sleep, your hot, shallow breath on the nape of my neck. Tonight, I feel the coolness of your bedside, your absence, a death, I stare at the shock of white where your head does not lie, ruffling feathers. And this is the last one in that series, and it's called Tacluso'r Gwely, which means tidying the bed then. Afterwards, you leave me to tidy up, to smooth the swollen mass of sheets. I run my palm along the duvet, ironing out the frantic hollow with a flat of my hand. I pull the covers taut, straighten the corners, feeling the crisp cotton between my fingers. The room still smells of us. My perfume, your sweet tan. The pillow wears the imprint of your head. I pick it up and shake it, urging it into shape, and stand back. It looks the same now, corrected, repaired, our fit of passion spent. I'm trying to remember what I was going to read next now. I'm going to read a poem called Palm Sunday, which Anne Drysdale and me had a bit of a battle over actually, but I'm really happy with how it turned out in the end. This is Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday brought snow, the ground hardened with frost, but still you came, bringing a promise of spring with your lilac coat. You unpack the presents slowly, a clean cloth, bottled water, steadying yourself on the marble headstone. You clean the grime from the gold letters, silently rereading the psalm that you chose, pausing at the gap where the letters stop, that empty gulf of stone. You arrange flowers, purple tulips and daffs, bought from a place where spring has already sprung. I can feel the hope in it. I think I'm probably going to finish on Accent, which is the title poem. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced this, but where I'm from, people have a negative view about the valleys, and to have a Valleys accent is seen as a negative thing. I was really just exploring my relationship with my own accent. And also, do you know how you hear yourself recorded and you listen back and you think, that is not me, I don't sound like that. So yes, it's kind of that as well. So accent. I'm conscious, suddenly, of my Valleys drawl, the clucking at the base of my throat, my H's that hang, disobedient from the start of words. I can hear the lilt of my A's, my O's dragging their feet. I try and fail to clip them short. I'm sure they're laughing at me now, at the rapid jumble of letters escaping from my lips. I've never felt so Welsh. I'll never speak again.
Thank you so much. Buy the book. Support Simon and the Bookshop, and support poets like Ellen, who we're going to be hearing a lot more from, I'm sure. So do buy the book. It's a delight to have Susan here with us this evening. Skindancing is the third collection that Sue has done with Cinnamon Press, and it's fantastic when you work with a poet over nearly 10 years now to see the poetry developing and the boundaries of language being pushed, boundaries of form being expanded, and this one absolutely does that in spadeful. It's extraordinary poetry in terms of the language it uses, in terms of the way you kind of slip in and out of these incredible moments of transformation, and I'm sure Sue will say a bit more about that. This kind of shamanic sense of where the borderlands are between the human and the animal and the more than element that just beautifully plats in and out, which is why that image on the front with the snake and the hair plaited together is so perfect. The book also comes with beautiful lino drawings from Pat Gregory, so you'll want to take it home with you. It's a fantastic object. Please welcome Susan Richardson.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you to Simon for hosting the event, and thanks very much to everyone for coming. Skindancing is a book that's been about 3 years in the making. but I think this whole theme of human-animal metamorphosis and shape-shifting is really a theme that I've been obsessed with for well over 10 years. It's really about our intimacy with and alienation from our animal selves and the wider animal world, and about our dysfunctional relationship with the wild. And my sources of inspiration have been quite wide, I suppose. Myths and story tales from a wide range of different cultures, from Inuit to Celtic, from Latin American to Norse. And also my own personal experience and training in shamanic journey and shamanic trance dance. So I might talk a little bit more about that as we move on. The first metamorphosis poem that I wrote for this particular collection was inspired by a French fairy tale, or that's the loose source of inspiration for it. And it's called The White Doe. And it follows, the fairy tale follows quite a traditional path, I suppose. There's a young girl who is cursed at birth by a witch, and the witch tells her parents that they must keep her out of the sunlight for the first 21 years of her life and not allow a drop of sunlight to fall on her face, because if they do, she will be transformed into a white doe and be condemned to wander the forest for the rest of her life. However, if they manage to keep her out of the sunlight for that length of time, she will grow up to marry a prince and live happily ever after. And of course, inevitably, she gets to be almost 21, she's met a prince, she's about to marry him, she's riding in a carriage to her marriage, and a shaft of sunlight pierces the carriage blind, falls on her face, and she's transformed into a deer. And of course, as the traditional pattern of these fairy tales go, the prince zooms off into the forest, rescues her, breaks the curse, and they do indeed live happily, if rather boringly, ever after. So I decided to use this as a source for the poem, but have my white doe actually relishing being there in the forest and loving that much more than she ever would have loved being married to a prince. And as well as the shape-shifting theme, I wanted to allow language to shape-shift so that verbs act as nouns and adjectives act as verbs and so on. So this is the white doe. As transformations go, this has no more daunt than the suddening of blood and breasts. It's horizontal at its best, belly hammocked between four legs, instead of back trapped, compliant wifing. Though my hands have hooved, they're now attuned to fungus rub and moss. My teeth are flossed heavily, I splurge through burns, and I've learnt to ask the sun to fondle flank after 21 dark, cursed years. Birch bark tonguing me, crossbills beaking pine seeds, tweakily from cones. Ground-smelling rowan, berrily with ottonus, ear twitch to a cracklish sound, worker ants nest mounding, all such a gorgeous. Not even the flies round my side-head eyes can undear me now. At last, I can be forgettish. No more bracelets, grammar, manners, standard lamps, strip lights, no more room fug of stew and my stale mother's breath, no more lonelies and you freakings, no more curtains, shutters, blinds. Instead, my hind mind's furned with ancient memories of wolf and the urge to never still. Though the man I was meant to wed turns hunter, I will outwood him, for an unlife in the unlight has taught me slinkness and how to happy ever after when I tell me tales. The more research that I did into shape-shifting tales and myths and so on, the more obvious it became that in our Western story tradition, the process of shape-shifting, of transformation from human into animal, is almost always a punishment, a form of punishment or a curse. Generally, it'll be a punishment brought upon a female character, means to keep a female character confined. And this is in stark contrast to a lot of stories and myths and so on from the non-Western tradition, where the process of transformation into animal is actually something positive, something to be celebrated. It may be the means to escape from a difficult situation. In Inuit tales, for example, young girls will transform into ptarmigan in order to escape from the suitor, an unwelcome suitor, or a resourceful grandmother will transform herself into a snowy owl to be able to go off and hunt and feed herself. So it's very much, it's a very, very different set of traditions there in terms of that whole shape-shifting process. And for me, it's very much about, in our Western tradition, the fact that we are very much distanced from the animal. And don't trust it, the fact that it's being constantly used as a form of punishment. But there is one story from the Celtic tradition which does actually work against this, I think, to a certain extent. And it's a story of Taliesin and Ceridwen. Some of you may be familiar with the sorceress Ceridwen, who puts her servant boy, Gwion Bach, in charge of stirring an enormous cauldron of inspiration, Awen, which she has created for her son, Morvran. And she tells her servant boy that under no circumstance must he sample a bit of this broth. However, either accidentally or accidentally on purpose, he does actually get a drop on his thumb and eats it. She, of course, is very, very angry. He transforms himself into a hare to get away from her. She becomes a greyhound in pursuit of him. He becomes a fish. She becomes an otter. He becomes one of a flock of birds. She becomes a sparrowhawk. And he thinks he's actually going to get the better of her and transforms himself into a tiny grain of wheat amidst thousands of other grains of wheat on the floor of a barn. But still she becomes a little black hen, pecks him up, swallows him, and 9 months later gives birth to Taliesin, the poet. So it's a really rich, multi-layered story. And a really breathtaking, exhilarating range of incarnations that are woven throughout the tale. And again, I use this as a source for a sequence of poems. I'll do the whole sequence. It's 4 poems. It's Gwion Bach's side of the story. So you'll hear his 4 different incarnations. Hare, fish, starling. I made him a starling among a big flock. And finally, grain of wheat. And I think in this poem I wanted to experiment with pronouns, have different forms of pronouns all the way through, and then finally end up with a pronounless poem at the end. So this is called Awen. Quicker than an ear's fear prick, quicker than instinct, quicker than the fist of a Jill on Jack, than roads slicing through meadows and mowers through leverets. So quick it's tea time, tomorrow next week. Saprise, leaf drop, crop spray, herb wilt. So quick decades have died since I sipped that soup of Ceridwen. And yes, I know it sounds strange, but I've outrun March and feel perfectly sane. I'm so quick I've reached the next geological age, and an Aesoped place. No lakes, parables or arable land. So quick I've spilled my knowledge stock and must double back to retrieve it. So quick I catch up with the future me. Shocked, I stop to river watch from a form beneath this tree and wait for the time when we and she must coincide, and lung pumps swapped for gills. Though soon my flesh will feel air's caress from all sides, this water is way more persuasive. My scales can't escape the herbal and blush of its purpose. And as it immerses me in my prehistory, not for one plish does it let me forget that I failed to outpace her and must aim now to outpatience her instead. No need to shoal breamily or leap for the place where I was born to spawn. Instead, I'll wait here unseen, chubbing under the cover of overhanging trees, and even when the distance between us seems thin, I will linger, staid as Sunday. Will she stay, canined on the brink? Will a bitterling flicker in her mind prick her to leave? If she peers in, will she think her plushy reflection is me, or will she glimpse her gudgeon grudges bottom feeding, nudging her to plunge in? This learning to us has been so rushed, making chatter patterns, duskly, hundred neighbour natter, flap, overlap, swift switch, cloud space, swirl. And now us is a one us, a glory us, for nourish the usness, for using ourselves from food short, land loss, and fright. When us comes, as us know she must, us will stun her with air stunt, with an us shunt of sky, just as sky realigns the us. She will try to un-us, then cuss our dizzy dazzle us gloss of flight. Us loves to live thus, usly. Am single syllable, synonym for wisdom, still life with stillness, witness to henpeck and wind whim, no other means to move. Yet old knowing of swim, speed, flight, plus all future shift and insight are compressed within, in plumule and radical. Didn't plan to un-animal, knew her talons loom so swooped inside, then ungenetically modified. Now crash course in chaff, adrenaline lack, too zen for active flock or shoal. No more goals of hide, flee, hope she'll bore, days with slate of wing. Instead, embrace this barn floor fate. Cultivate a Durham state of mind. Meditate on swish of scythe. Imitate silence. Alongside the shape-shifting theme, there's also a theme that relates to all the uses to which animals have been put over the centuries. And I don't just mean things like intensive farming and so on, but I suppose how we've intellectually used animals. I think Claude Lévi-Strauss, the structuralist, talks about the fact that animals are good to think with. And the first metaphor is believed to have been an animal-related one from Homer's Odyssey. And so we've used them as totems, personifications in adverts, metaphors, as I said. So I've got a few poems which contribute to that theme. One of them is about insomnia, from which I suffer very badly. And on one of my 3 a.m. thrashings around, the phrase insomnia llama popped into my head. And so this is the Insomnia Llama poem, and it's called Zoomorphic. The Insomnia Llama spits in your mug of valerian tea. When you try to mindfully breathe, she chews brome grass at your right ear, regurgitating for hours from stomachs 1, 2, and 3. She kicks your counted sheep, hisses at your downward dogs and twisting crowbras. From the occupied side of your bed, she bids you pluck her double coat. You card and spin a yawn of yarn, weave exhausted scarves and shawls. Your walls are restless with hand-knit hangings. Rugs toss and turn on your floors. Some nights she drags you on a trek, lugs all your frets in the pack on her back. As you crawl across the high steps, the air thins your mind, while a condor jabs your unsteady thighs. Much later, once you've bathed in clary sage and lavender, her mate arrives. His ogling while they copulate would be quite soporific, if it only didn't augur the birth of a herd. From llamas to hawks. And I think this was a poem that came directly out of some shamanic journeying training that I was doing. At the time I was looking for an intuitive route into several poems a more intuitive route, because I'd done lots and lots of research into the whole shape-shifting theme. And this particular hawk poem came out of an experience of a shamanic journey. And it seems to be about having been a teenager in the 1980s, so there are quite a number of 80s references in there, and feeling that I didn't really fit in at school and so on, but actually feeling quite a lot of defiance in that not fitting in at the same time. So this is We Wore. We wore hawks in our hair that year, Harris hawks, who migrated from marshes and mangroves to frosted highlights and frizzy perms. We loved them for mantling our blushes and crooked teeth, and for the way they preyed on the thesaurus when we were lost for words. Our classmates gasped in double French as they swooped on Camus or hovered, graceful as conjugation, just above our desks. Best of all, we got excused from games when the netball bibs failed to stretch over our heads. Meanwhile, our mothers tutted, feared futures deplumed of proposals and proper jobs, pecked us to deck ourselves in franchises and rah-rah skirts instead. Only at exam time did our hawks feel heavy, adding to the weight of Hamlet quotes and lateral moraine. Come summer, they molted Napoleon, osmosis, tore the square on the hypotenuse to shreds, while we fed them live A grades and dreamt of boys with squirrels round their necks. We expected to wear them forever, till one day, taking Polaroids for pen friends, we waited for the image to form and saw no hawks at all. I'll pick up, I think, on Ellen's language sequence of poems and share a language poem. It's really, I think, comes from a lot of so-called experts' beliefs about the superiority of humans, and the fact that the one thing that sets humans apart from animals or other animals is the fact that humans have language with which they can rationalise and reason and argue, whereas animals don't. That crops up again and again in research around the whole human-animal superiority debate. And I wanted to take the quote by philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, "If a lion could speak, we could not understand him," which is about the unknowability of the animal other, and I suppose challenge the idea of the superiority of the human, and also bring in lots of different cultural references to lions, of which there are many. So this is, "If a lion could speak, we could not understand him." If a lion could speak, we'd hear how Kruger has flattened his bowels, how Longleat's left him with a lisp, how he's zoo mute, and how his tamer wields a whip, then delves between his jaws to extract the stammer. If a lion could speak, we'd correct his grammar, purge his syntactical savannah of herds of double negatives, then wince if he ripped apart just one infinitive. If a lion could speak, he'd sphinx talk about the thorn in his paw, of how MGM lip-synced his roar, and how Albert gave him heartburn for weeks. If a lion could speak, we may deign to reply, though very loud and slow, like a lion's really a scarecrow in disguise. If a lion could speak, we'd insist he use English, but he'd cleave to lionese. The few of us who'd learnt leopard might grasp the lack of past and future tense, while the rest would remain baffled, more concerned to learn how to order a beer in giraffe. If a lion could speak, we'd tire of his whinges of wardrobes and witches, of how Richard filched his heart, and how his rampant act on flags has knackered his hips. In time we'd surely ignore him, drawn to the wit of warthogs and antelope banter instead. If a lion could speak, he'd say, "Take a degree in my language of strangling ungulates and wrangling with vultures for the meat. Then we'll talk." I'll finish with a poem that returns to the shape-shifting theme. And particularly when I was reading Native American tales, and also Inuit tales as well, there were lots and lots of bear shape-shifting stories. Grizzly bears and polar bears. And there was a whole bear cult in Europe as well, of course, where there'd be many thousands of years ago, where the bear was really an icon and was worshipped. And in a lot of the Native American and Inuit tales, there's a lot of evidence of women marrying bears and giving birth to part human, part bear offspring. And I suppose this poem, which finishes the collection, is an attempt to have a positive ending at a time when there's not a lot to be positive about, certainly in terms of the animal world, in terms of the fact that in the last 40 years we've lost 50% of our vertebrate wildlife, for example. And so it's an attempt, I suppose, to write a positive poem that says, is there some way of embracing, reconnecting, not only with the animals in us, but the wider animal kingdom. So this is Silvertip. She loves how honey drizzles and stickies his fur as he plods to the bus stop. And how shopping now means forage for tubers, forbs, roots, and nuts of the white bark pine. She hates her workmates' porridge gossip, her mother's warning horns and wails that the pigtailed girl who always learnt her German verbs should come to this. She hikes through his tiger mind, defies his bluff charges, sings "I've got you under my skin" at blind corners, shifts her desk upwind of him, thrilled he still scents her, even when streets away. She chucks out her lady shave, checks belly, back, breasts for silver-tipped flecks of hair, takes care to ingest 20,000 calories each day, for she means to winter sleep with him, deeper than any princess threat, in the den of his boreal breath. She will lick what she births into a mix of huffs and words, and emerge in spring as mother of the ancestors of a new race. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here this evening. Huge thanks to Simon. Thanks to Ellen and Susan for coming all this way. Buy their books. They'll sign them for you. Thank you all.
Please help yourself to some more wine. I'm sure the poets will answer questions if you've got any. But fantastic reading. Thank you, Jan, for organising it.
Thank you.
Thanks.